under his eye. Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to my channel where I talk about all the geeky pop culture type things that I enjoy, and I like reading, so that's included in this, and I occasionally do book reviews. This is going to be a book review, and it's going to be on this book, Margaret Atwood's sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, The Testaments. Now this book, I think, has the honour of being the only book I have ever bought on release day. I went into town specifically on the day this was released and bought this book. In fact, I went into WH Smith's and there was one copy on the shelf. There was a woman browsing the shelves, but she didn't seem to have picked what she wanted. I went, immediately saw it, picked it off the shelf and heard a sigh from behind me, because actually she'd been scanning the shelves for it and it appeared to be the last copy. Then we had a very British back and forth of, no, you must take it. No, you take it. You were here first. No, you picked it up. You know, very British. And eventually, I ended up buying it. She was going to go check with the staff if there had been any more, and hopefully she would still get her copy. Now, it turns out I ran into her in the supermarket about half an hour later, and they did, in fact, have a whole pile of copies elsewhere in the store. So she was fine, and the weight was lifted off my mind that I hadn't just taken this last copy from the person that had been scanning the shelves for it beforehand. Now, the first thing I should say about my review of this book is that I have not, and this may be sacrilege to some people, but I have not read The Handmaid's Tale book. I have seen the TV series. That may be sacrilege to some people, I don't know, but I first discovered Handmaid's Tale through the TV series, and I just never got around to reading the book. I gather there are some differences between the book and the TV series of The Handmaid's Tale. We'll come to that in a minute, but I just wanted to let you know that first. I'll talk about that more in a little bit, though. What is this book about? Well, this is set about 15 years or 20 years, I can't remember the exact number, but, a good while after that first book. And whereas that first book was all from the perspective of one character, Offred, or June as we know her in the TV series, although it's never revealed apparently in the book that her name is June. It's hinted at apparently, but never revealed. This one isn't just from the perspective of one person. It's still first-person perspectives, but it's divided. The chapters are divided into three, so we alternate between the perspectives of different people. One is Aunt Lydia from the first book from the TV series. If you're familiar with either of those, you'll know who Aunt Lydia is. She is the aunt that in Gilead is portrayed, certainly in The Handmaid's Tale, as quite a vicious, nasty, true believer of the Gilead cause. And so there are chapters of her writing sort of her memoirs in this book, and that's interlaced with two testaments, two case studies from two different young women, one who has grown up in Gilead, the other who has grown up in the much more free country of Canada. And the story is really about the contrast of these two characters' lives, interspersed with the stuff from Aunt Lydia as well, giving you a bit more of a wider perspective of that world. And eventually, as you might guess, I'm going to keep this spoiler relatively spoiler-free, but, eventually they do sort of, their lives do cross over somewhat, but I won't go any further in telling you how than that. Now, going back to whether or not you can read this without having read the book and only seen the TV series, because that might be something you're wondering. I didn't find it a problem at all. I didn't find it a problem that I hadn't read the book and had only seen the TV series. There are differences between the book and the TV series. I've read a few articles detailing what those differences are. They don't really impact this book an awful lot. I would say the only major differences that I could pick up while reading this were maybe some character descriptions in terms of how they physically look, but that's such a small thing it doesn't really matter. And there is one bit of backstory to one of the characters. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say in terms of the backstory of Aunt Lydia, seems to have been changed a little bit from the TV series, because we've got that one episode of the TV series which delves into her background a bit from before the fall of the United States, and this gives a slightly different perspective on that and a slightly different background. However, I think Margaret Atwood was very clever because she did add in a little, just like one little line in this, which kind of makes it so that you could factor the thing you saw in the TV series could also be her backstory here. But there's this other stuff that just hasn't been revealed in the TV series as well. So she clearly had an idea of what she wanted Aunt Lydia's backstory to be, but I think she added this one little line in there to sort of, for the fans of the TV show, so that there's not too much disparity and you can go, oh, okay, that bit we saw was this little bit. And I think that was quite clever, a nice way to sort of marry the TV show and the book up a little bit more and keep it a bit more consistent. But I would say you absolutely do not need to have read the book in order to read and enjoy this. One thing I like about this is that it does continue to develop the world of Gilead that we have seen in the Handmaid's Tale TV series, that those that have read the books will have gotten. And it doesn't feel like it's unnatural. There are things in this world sort of 15, 20 years later that we didn't see in the Handmaid's Tale. There's these missionaries that go off to other countries called Pearl Girls, and they weren't anywhere to be seen in the Handmaid's Tale. But the Handmaid's Tale book is from the perspective of Offred, so stuff she doesn't know wouldn't have appeared in there because that's her. It's a transcript of her recordings of her cassette tapes narrating what's happened to her. So if she wasn't aware of the Pearl Girls, then these missionaries that go off to Canada and other place to try and recruit people to come back to Gilead, then there's no reason why it'd be in there. It's not quite the same in the TV show because obviously we're not just seeing from her perspective, we are seeing other things. But also, don't forget there's 15 years between the Handmaid's Tale, 15 to 20 between the Handmaid's Tale and this. Stuff moves on, and in those early days of Gilead, it makes sense that they may not have gotten to the point where they're sending out missionaries yet, but then, decade or so later, their political program has progressed, and that's something they might do. So it's quite nice to see that the world of Gilead expanded a bit. You've also got this sort of class of people called the Econo people, and they're married. They're married people. They're not handmaids or anything, but they have a lesser social status. They're not actually featured in this book that much. They're just mentioned. But it's another sort of little bit of world building, which is quite nice. Now, one thing I do know about the book of The Handmaid's Tale is that the ending chapter of the book is this sort of epilogue thing set, I think it might be like a couple of 100 years later, which is talking about Gilead as a past tense thing. It doesn't exist anymore. It fell at some point. And I think that left a lot of questions for people. And that is probably why Margaret Atwood wrote this book, because there were these lingering questions. People have been asking her for years, okay, but how did it fall? What happened next? And I think this is her attempt to answer that. There'll be questions. People will ask, well, did we really need that? Sometimes having that mystery is a good way to end something. And to not know exactly how you got there, to know that, okay, Gilead falls, but we don't know how. That kind of mystery can be good, but evidently a lot of her readers wanted to find out a bit more about the fall, and this is her chance to do that while still leaving a bit of mystery, I think, because it does go into the sort of starting, gives you hints at how the regime might end up falling, but it doesn't show you the fall. It doesn't show you anything like that. It just sort of it lays the groundwork for it much more than The Handmaid's Tale did. So in that sense, it's a very optimistic book, whereas The Handmaid's Tale TV series so far has been, and I gather the book has been quite a pessimistic sort of look at a warning, this is what the world might come to. But now I think in today's political climate, and Margaret Atwood has said this, we are much closer now to The Handmaid's Tale reality than we were in 1985 or whenever, the 1980s, when The Handmaid's Tale was released. We are now much more closer to that. We can see certain things in our world that should make us very cautious. So she wanted, I think, to write this as a book of hope instead of one of despair. Not so much one of warning, but one of hope to inspire people to fight against that kind of despotic sort of regimes. I really like the format of this book. I liked the way that it flipped between the three people's viewpoints. Aunt Lydia, it was great to see a bit of sort of insight into her, the way she ticks and what motivates her. She is a, very pious person, but it's not very as simple as that. And what led her to the place that we saw her in Handmaid's Tale, that was very interesting to see, and to see a bit of, what makes her tick. And then we get these sort of contrasting worlds of the girl in Canada and the girl in Gilead. And this isn't a handmaid in Gilead. This is a daughter of a commander. So seeing their struggles and how they question their own identity and question the world around them while still being, quite wedded to those worlds is very interesting. And the gradual change and revelations of their opinions, it is a very interesting thing to watch. So I really like the way it sort of kind of intermingled those two elements. And then later on in the book, it kind of shifts a little bit, because you've got these three very separate stories in some ways, and then they sort of come together in the last third of the book, and the format changes quite slightly, because previously in the first half of the book you got quite long chunks of one of the girls, then the other girl, and then a little bit of Aunt Lydia, then a big chunk of one of the girls, where there's like several chapters. And then later on it kind of flips, the pace picks up and it flips between them a lot more quickly. So you've just got like one chapter of one chapter of one chapter of the other. And so the pace picks up, as does the story. The pace in the story picks up at that point as well. And the tension and the suspense is all picked up around that point. And I think that was a very good way to move, having the sort of longer, more thought out sections of them to the more fast pace. It kind of mirrored the story, so that was a good way of portraying that. On the negatives of this, I would say it is a very predictable book. I guessed a lot of the twists very early on. There are several twists that come at various points of this book right up to the end. There's one reveal that comes about a third of the way in, which I'd guessed within the first few chapters, and then the one at the end I'd guessed at the same point. I'm not going to, like I say, spoiler free, I'm not going to go into what they are, but I would say I had guessed most of the twists of this book quite early on. It didn't spoil the book completely, because I find when you guess twists, it can be a mixed bag. On the plus side, you feel a sense of achievement, that, hey, I got it right, that's great. But I think if it's too easy to guess, then it kind of cheapens that a little bit. And I think this was just a little bit too easy to guess. But I don't think it negates the importance of the story. I don't think it negates the emotional impact of the story in any way, knowing these things. But it just felt a little bit... If there was one thing I would majorly criticise for it, it was just a little bit too easy to guess the twists. The other thing was, it kind of felt a little bit anticlimactic at the end. There'd been some really good building of tension and suspension and all that sort of thing throughout the last sort of third of the book. And it was a real page turner, absolutely. And then it kind of ends quite abruptly. And again, it's a bit of a mixed bag, because anything more might have felt like padding, because the story had kind of come to a natural end, but it happened so suddenly that I just felt like there should have been slightly more in there. Talking about needing slightly more, I think there was a section in the middle of the book where the two stories first meet, and that section felt a little bit like it was rushed. I would have liked to have seen more of these clashing worlds and how the differences between the two girls really sort of ramp up. But that was quite a short bit of the novel, really, and I think that could have done with being a little bit longer. Not too much, but just a little bit longer. Overall, The Testaments by Margaret Atwood was a very enjoyable book. It was definitely a page turner. It's a very easy read. Was it necessary? I don't know if it was necessary, but do books need to be necessary? I think from a story perspective, if you're just looking at it as a piece of fiction, I think The Handmaid's Tale ended in a way that left a lot of people with questions that they wanted answers to. But I don't think In some, like I said earlier, I think in some respects that's good. So in that respect, maybe it's not necessary. But I am one for I love expanding on what we know about the worlds and world building. So for me, I very much enjoyed it. May not have been necessary, but it was enjoyable. In terms of politically, is it necessary? Well, I think Margaret Atwood's motivation for writing it may be inspired by current political events in the world. And yeah, I think we all need a little bit of hope right now. And this book, while has that, I think actually I read somewhere that Margaret Atwood said this is not a book of hope. Well, no, did she say that? No, she said something like, I can't remember the exact quote, so somebody put it in the comments below if you know what it is, but something about it still being quite a depressing book, and in many ways it is, but it's got that hope at the end, and like we know Gilead will fall, and we're starting to see the slight hints of that, and how that might start to come about in this book, which for me seems quite hopeful. So The Testaments, I'm not going to give it a mark out of 10 because I don't like to, I've stopped doing that, but it is a very enjoyable book. I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's also, the hardback is lovely. I love this cover. I like what they've done, a very simple, stylistic cover. I like what they've done with they've got the Gilead girl on the front, the Canadian girl on the back. I like that, and it looks nice on the bookshelf. And yeah, very lovely book. So if you're someone that wants a nice bookshelf and nice looking books on your bookshelf, it's a nice one to pick up. Otherwise, you might want to wait for the paperback if you just want something that's easier to carry around. Very good book. Recommend it. Thank you for watching this video. I do book reviews here every so often. I also do lots of stuff on pop culture that I enjoy. Geeky stuff like Star Trek and Doctor Who and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and things like that. I do book reviews about those type of things as well as TV episode reviews and all of that sort of stuff. So if you like that, then do, and all want more book reviews, got more of those coming, then do hit that like button, share this video if you enjoyed it with your friends, and, you know, all that jazz. And the bell icon. If you're going to subscribe and hit the bell icon. That would be great if you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much. I will see you soon. Goodbye.